If somebody stops drinking, maybe they're going to rehab. 6 weeks later, their brain has started to regrow, and it has regrown approximately 2% in volume over those 6 weeks. So that's a huge growth in size. It actually grows in size.
It shrinks when you're addicted?
Absolutely.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sober Strength Show powered by Health. I'm your host, Jesse Karaja. Thank you for being here, for showing up for yourself today. We've got a great episode for you, I have to say. In a single episode and discussion, I don't think I've ever learned more in my entire life, probably. And I'm really looking forward to having you all hear the conversation with Dr. John Umhau. Dr. John Umhau is a physician with a career spanning decades. He's an expert in addiction medicine. I don't even know that I can do him justice queuing up his credentials, but really what we talk about is the science of addiction. What's happening in our brains? Why is it happening? Are certain people at risk more than others? I think more importantly, what do we do about it? What are the best ways that people can move away from whatever it is that they're overindulging on and move towards a happier, healthier life? We talk about nutrition. We talk about medicine. We talk about supplements, lifestyle, meaning, all the things. And it's an amazing conversation. So I'm so glad to be able to bring you this conversation with Dr. John Umhau. Before we get started, I have to ask, and I always do, if you could please, if you listen to the show often or you stream us, please follow the show, give us a rating, review, and just let somebody know. The algorithm is a thing I'm learning, and the more people that know about the show and engage with us, the more people we can reach. So if you would do that, I would be very grateful. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the powerful and wise Dr. John Umhau. Let's go deep. All right, everybody. I am sitting here with Dr. Umhau. Welcome to the show, Dr. Umhau.
Thanks, Jesse. So delighted to be here with you.
It's a blessing to have you. We were just chatting a little bit offline, getting to know each other. I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes in real time. You're a renowned expert in addiction. Well, you're an expert in your craft. But can you just we'll just start off. Can you just tell my audience a little bit about yourself and your background and why it is that you're doing what you're doing?
Sure. So I'm a family doc in sort of background my dad was a family doctor, but I got more interested in prevention. So I did a clinical preventive medicine training, and I really connected the best with the things that we could do the most for, which would be the people with alcohol problems. And so when I was in my training in alcohol work at Johns Hopkins, I had to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting every week and learn about it. And I really liked the guys that I was listening to in these meetings, and the gals and the guys really cared for each other, and they were working on to make themselves better people. And I said, I can help these folks. This would be something really interesting to work on. And I've sort of worked on that throughout my career. Really fortunate to have some opportunities to learn about alcoholism. I was working with a group serving the homeless in DC, and I got an opportunity to talk to some folks at the NIH who are doing research on alcoholism. And I ended up helping them for about 20 years. And in the process, I learned a lot about how to help folks with alcoholism. When I retired, I just wanted to use what I learned to see what I could do in my private practice and help folks. And that's sort of what I do now.
So part of your training, I'm assuming you weren't struggling with alcohol, and then you were sitting in on these meetings just to kind of get an understanding of the condition?
Right. I came at it different from some other people. I like the personality that's sort of characteristic for people with alcohol. And I sort of put it together why that is. So alcoholism is mysterious. And what I'm going to say is sort of my take on it, my perspective on the science. But it's sort of driven by the endorphins that the alcohol creates. There's a crossover, but people get addicted to opiates. But alcoholism produces opiates in the brain, the endorphins. And they talk about naltrexone working great to fight those endorphins. And so this wonderful drug people use to help cravings for alcohol, which blocks the endorphins, really made me recognize that this endorphin story is really an important part of alcoholism. And it turns out that people with alcoholism or people whose family has a history of alcoholism, people who've recovered from alcoholism, they generally have lower levels of endorphins in their blood. This is kind of a fundamental issue for a lot of people. What's the situation? Well, if they have low endorphins, my thought is maybe their brain needs these endorphins. And so to get those endorphins, they would drink. But the other way to get endorphins is the way that shapes their personality, shapes who they are. Because if you need endorphins, you do activities that will bring endorphins. And what are those? So humans get endorphins from synchronous activity with others, from serving other people, from doing hard work side by side with somebody else, whether it's exercising with somebody, dancing with a partner, singing in a choir. And you get endorphins from other people. So you don't get endorphins so much from singing by yourself or exercising in the basement or working alone. You get endorphins when you're with other people, marching in step, doing Tai Chi in the park with all these other folks, moving in synchrony with yourself. The thing that really struck me most recently was the fact of this one study, which showed that people who donated money got endorphins from donating money. People interested in donating blood, even though the huge needle would cause a lot of pain, if they knew they were donating the blood for some earthquake victim, they got less pain because the endorphins block that pain. So to study endorphins, people look at how much pain reduction that they get from a certain activity. So my favorite study was a study of people with cancer, chronic cancer pain. And these patients were given two conditions to study the endorphin production that would occur that would reduce their pain. First condition, they had to do a set amount of work cleaning their bathrooms. Kind of gross, but that's what they did. Second condition, the same amount of work cleaning the bathrooms of other cancer patients. And by serving these other cancer patients, by cleaning their bathrooms, they got a remarkable, significant reduction in their pain. They got endorphins from serving other people. People with a tendency for alcoholism have the same drive. They want to be with other people. They want to be the life of the party. They want to serve others. That's why I was so attracted to those folks in those Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. They were kind of nifty. I'm not like that. I am attracted to those people. That's why we need people with those genetics. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I got dealt the wrong genetics. Well, you also got genetics that kind of make humans, because that's sort of what I was driven by, I think, in my early training.
Just a point of clarification, and then I want to double click on one thing. So the clarification would be, so you're saying that essentially doing things with other people side by side produces endorphins, but are you not saying that it's impossible to have an endorphin release when you're by yourself? I mean, I worked out this morning in my basement and I felt pretty damn good. You get more.
You get more when you're with somebody else.
Roger that. Okay.
If you're running with your partner or bounce a tennis ball off a wall, play tennis ball with your friend. Right? What's the difference?
Yeah, no comparison. Yeah, I got you. All right, and then just for me to understand with my my marine brain here, so I just want to double click on this disposition of, I'll call it, someone prone to alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, whichever term you choose or fancy. Just describe it to me more. So are you saying that like someone like myself who was drawn to alcohol instantly and immediately, and it was prolonged for decades, right? Are you saying that my physiology, my body is wired differently than someone who isn't as susceptible or at risk? And then just help me understand how, like what's going on in my brain, what's going on, what did my mom and dad gift me with?
Well, they one thing that they gifted with you was, there are lots of caveats with all these things, and everybody's different and individual. So, but people that have their first drink and they can hold their liquor, they don't sway. Okay, so like if someone takes a swig of alcohol in their 18s, their first drink, and they stand stock still, they can have another one, versus the guy that's just kind of swaggering back and forth. Whoa, that was a lot of drink. If you then look at those people 20 years from that first drink, you could predict that the ones that did not sway, the ones that could hold their alcohol, those are the ones that had problems with alcoholism in the future. So it's the little bit of adverse effect that you didn't get probably, which would keep someone else from drinking too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking, and there's going to be a question here, but I want you to understand my kind of like thought process here. But I was realizing the other day that for as long as I can remember, I would put it like this: I'm not someone that kind of lives in the middle when it comes to like using things like caffeine or distractions with technology or alcohol. My goal in life right now is to kind of live in that middle ground where I'm just completely free of any outside interference on my headspace or my physiological state. And I can tie that all the way back to my childhood. Like I felt like I was always keeping myself busy. I'll put it this way. I was never comfortable in the stillness. I was never comfortable kind of like sitting with myself. I always had to be doing something or later on in life ingesting something to change my headspace. Is that typical in the patients you've seen and in the research and studies that you've done, that kind of characteristic? Or just kind of help me unpack that. And you can send me a bill afterwards.
That's kind of that's kind of a unique thing about you, Jesse. But so it's how to put that together. I don't know. Maybe you were looking for doing things with other people to get a little bit of endorphin. Maybe that's what you're looking for, which was really neat because then you were driven to like do things with other people, get things going.
Yeah, for sure. So if we could, again, maybe triple click on the endorphin piece. I know when you ingest a substance, and we'll focus this on alcohol, endorphins are released. They need to be received in order to have the experience that's intended. And I'll stop the description there, but just kind of walk us through that process. What's happening kind of mechanically, internally, as we ingest alcohol?
There is a lot of research on the brain. And let's go back to Pavlov's dogs. You guys remember in biology, the dogs would be trained so they get a piece of steak, and then they would ring a bell every time they got the steak, and so forth. When the dogs heard the bell, eventually they would go ahead and salivate as if they were actually going to get the steak. Even though they didn't get the steak, their brain was producing the same neurochemicals as if they were eating the steak. So when people drink, they get endorphins released as the alcohol goes to the body and is metabolized to endorphins and some endorphin-like chemicals. Well, after a while, people see the beer and they know they're going to have a drink of beer, and they remember the alcohol causes endorphins, and the endorphins cause the pleasure even before they drink. And that's creates a symptom of craving. So as you imagine drinking, your brain starts to put into your brain circulation these endorphins, which then remind your brain, hey, there's some more alcohol coming. I want some more of this. And that priming effect of the endorphins, whether it's from the actual first drink or from just thinking about drinking as if you're craving, makes you want to do it again. Your brain wants the endorphin stimulation. And over time, as you drink and get endorphins and drink and get endorphins, the nerves that are involved in that get bigger. It's sort of like use it and it grows. So that's where we get these nerve pathways in our brains. Just somebody with obsessive thoughts about something or other will have eventually a pathway in their brain that's more robust than someone who doesn't think about it very much. You use it or lose it. So if you use it, then it will maintain this strong nerve pathway in your brain for alcohol. So that's how come when you stop drinking and you stop the cycle, eventually you stop thinking about it, you stop craving alcohol. But once you had that first drink after a long time, what you've experienced is maybe the alcohol deprivation effect. Your brain is thinking about that alcohol more and more, and you get more desire of those receptors sort of upregulate. And when you do drink, you get more pleasure from that drink than you would otherwise. A guy named Sinclair developed these studies where he looked at rats and he trained the rats to drink alcohol. And he found that the longer that he deprived the animals of alcohol, the more they wanted it, the more they would lever press to get the alcohol. And that alcohol deprivation effect is probably why people crave alcohol more and more and more over time, and why they would have people that couldn't resist the urge to binge drink. And then they stop and they say, oh, I got to stop drinking. And then it can be really strong about that because the craving is not so strong. But then later on, as the brain adapts with this upregulation from the endorphin receptors, then they want to drink and they relapse. That's where we understand that now. That's why we can use medicines like naltrexone to kind of block that process. And it helps people be able to stop drinking without going through the white knuckling process.
Yeah, we're going to go into medication-assisted treatment in just a moment. So if I'm hearing you and understanding, essentially every time you drink and you kind of like give into that urge, if you will, you're strengthening that psychological dependence in a way.
Yes.
You're
right.
Oh, wow.
So there's a really physical thing in the brain that grows. These nerves are adaptable.
There's this concept that I know enough about it to say it, and that's about it. And I want to ask you about the hedonic set point, or maybe just to say that there's this idea, or maybe this science, that the more you give into that urge, the more you allow those endorphins to be released and then become dependent and relying on them, those other activities that you could be doing that release endorphins, you become less and less receptive to it. So things you said earlier, like just dancing or doing things with other people. Is that true that like the more we allow alcohol or another substance to become like a primary source of endorphins, we're not as receptive or maybe don't experience the other joys of life quite as much?
Well, it seems to be people's experience. Certainly the brain adapts to what we do. And if the brain is accustomed to getting its endorphins from one pathway, then we do that over and over again. We're creatures of habit, and the endorphins sort of drive that habit. One of the things that are good about endorphins that kind of drive humanity is we're driven to be with our families. We're with them, and we eat and we enjoy each other, back and forth, conversation and so forth. And so those endorphins kind of create the habit to bind us to our family in that way. The same way with our friends, people that we're with. And the same thing with alcohol. If we drink, we're eventually more bound with our alcohol than we are with other things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that it would vary from different folks based on the level of addiction that they're experiencing. But when we're talking about the brain and what you wire it into when you continue to drink and use things, how long does it take for someone, assuming they can remove alcohol and do some other lifestyle adjustments, but what have you seen to how long does it take to get to somebody to like kind of a reset or rewire their brain to a healthier place?
Well, that's all depends on the individual. I've seen people have a religious conversion and wow, they're a different person the next day. Sometimes that's the same effect with medications. Other times people need longer periods of time, a few months, a year. It all depends. Part of it, I think, depends on the nutritional status of the individual and how well the brain can grow back.
Can we talk about that? When you say nutritional status of the individual, what do you mean?
So I've been always fascinated by nutrition because I think it's one of those areas where we can really make a difference for people that are not wealthy and can't afford medications and can't afford doctor therapy. We can always recommend a diet that's going to be healthy for folks. It turns out that that's really true for alcohol sufferers because if you have a really great situation going on with your nutrition, your brain is going to be protected, I think, from developing alcoholism. So here's the converse of that. If somebody stops drinking, maybe they're going to rehab. 6 weeks later, their brain has started to regrow, and it has regrown approximately 2% in volume over the 6 weeks. So that's a huge growth.
The actual size of the brain.
It actually grows in size.
Shrinks. It shrinks when you're addicted?
Absolutely.
Wow.
One of the strange things about alcoholism is that people have this preconceived notion of how it should be treated based on their personal experience. And the doctors that see patients in the emergency room, they're not trained in how to treat alcoholism. And what they see, however, is they see people in the emergency room who have a atrophied or shrunken brain. And they'd say, oh, that person has alcoholism because their brain is smaller than it should be for their age. But doctors don't do anything with that. They don't use that information for any purpose because no one knows what to do. But if you think about it, if you push the nutrition that's critical for the brain, it's only logical that the brain would recover quicker. So that's what I do in my practice. My 5 minutes of fame as a research doctor was to develop a system to measure and image the intake of the omega-3 fat called DHA, and we measure the uptake in the brain. So you can see my picture in the background. That's my magazine cover, my 5 minutes of fame. And we were able to show that people in recovery had an increased need for this omega-3 fatty acid in their brain. They took it up more. And that difference was because their brains were trying to recover. Their brain had been damaged because of the lack of omega-3 in their diet, either through lack of eating fish, and also because the alcohol would deteriorate what omega-3 was there, or maybe other processes. But anyway, the brain is built of fat, and the most important fat are these omega-3s. And if people don't eat fish or seafood, they're not going to be able to have a regrowth of their brain the same way that they would otherwise, because we need so much.
Hey, it's Jesse, and if you've been following this show, then you know I've had my fair share of struggles with alcohol over the years. You also know that I built a pretty solid toolkit to help maintain a healthy relationship with alcohol. Things like fitness, mindfulness, accountability groups, and technology. All great, all helpful, but there's one tool I've recently found that blew my mind, and I can't believe it took me so long to discover it. It's called naltrexone, an FDA-approved, science-backed, and affordable medication that helps reduce cravings and control drinking. The first time I took it, I'll never forget, I was skeptical and not completely buying into the idea that a medication can help me with drinking. But just after a few days, I could not believe how effective it was in eliminating all of my cravings for alcohol. It needs to be more better known. And that is where Or Health comes in, and I'm honored to have them as a sponsor of the show. You can have doctor-prescribed naltrexone shipped discreetly and directly to your door. No pharmacies, no doctor's offices, just the help you need. It's online, it's private, and it's judgment-free, and most importantly, it works. As of today, over 35,000 Or members have been treated, and 76% of respondents report drinking less in just 2 short weeks. So here's how to get started. Text STRENGTH to 710-710. That's STRENGTH to 710-710. You'll take a quick, discreet survey, and they'll guide you through the entire process of trying naltrexone for the first time. It's easy, straightforward, and honestly, might be the best move you make for yourself today. So if you're ready to take a massive step forward into controlling your alcohol intake, text STRENGTH to 710-710 and let Or Health help you redefine your relationship with alcohol. Yeah, I almost wonder if, depending on the population you're looking at, but I wonder if, people suffering with AUD are less likely to eat healthy. Maybe they're less likely to eat sources that have, it's like, which is the cause? Is it the alcohol depleting it and all those things? Or is it because behaviorally, they're not likely to be focusing on their health because they're suffering from active addiction,
Well, the way I put it together, and it's hard to do studies that would prove this, but I think if someone eats really well, if they eat a lot of fish, if they really pay attention to their diet, also if they're physically active, their brain works really well. And so they're able to overcome any kind of craving for alcohol. They just have more willpower. Whatever willpower they have is able to exert a lot more effect over the lower parts of their brain that might be driving them to drink. So that's why I think you see a lot less problems with alcohol in Japan. Now, the Japanese businessmen that I've heard of will drink excessively in the evening and then get up the next morning and go to work. But if they drink too much, then they know to stop because their brain is protected, because Japanese eat a lot of fish. And the same sort of thing might work for people in the Mediterranean countries, which they drink, alcohol regularly. But it doesn't seem, or at least traditionally, there was not as much alcohol problems with those populations as there would be in the steppes of Russia, where they have,
Right.
Grain alcohol and not a whole lot of seafood.
Yeah, I'm going to get ahead of something here. If anyone listening, don't get any ideas. Don't go to Costco and get 3 pounds of salmon and think you can binge drink tonight. That's not what he's saying.
Right. But my experience in my private practice, so I do a telemedicine practice. And I've treated homeless guys. I've treated people with lots of losses in their lives and all sorts of social strata. But in my private practice, I have to take just people that still have computers and still have jobs generally. I've got hundreds of patients that I've seen. And out of those hundreds of patients, I think maybe 3 or 4 drink soft drinks. That's it.
Really?
Everybody else is really interested in health.
Yeah.
And because they have health, they have the awareness. They're not in denial. They recognize, wait a minute, I'm going down the tubes because I'm drinking more than I want to. I'm drinking 2 bottles of wine a night. I shouldn't be drinking this much. I need to do something about it. And they have the brain power to recognize that. They don't have the brain power that they would like to have to stop, but they have enough to find me on the internet and make an appointment and get medicine.
Hey, I fit that profile. I mean, ever since the Marines, I was 20 years old. I mean, I'm 2 decades. I fitness. I work out 5 times a week. I eat healthy. I eat smart. I focus on things like omegas. So I've actually asked myself, especially coming out of seasons where I knew I was drinking heavily and as a detriment to my health, I've asked myself, how much did I protect myself? Or I would put it this way, how much worse could it have been if I did not have those habits that I was reinforcing, And like you're kind of putting an emphasis on that for me, for sure.
So let me tell you a story. So when I first was doing this research at the NIH, we thought these omega-3s would be really important for the brain. And so I had a friend of mine that was running a program in Tucson, the Salvation Army program. And he was wondering whether he could try it with his patients. I said, sure, take the 3 most difficult cases you've got, the guys in the most trouble, the 3 worst cases that you could find, give them a lot of fish oil, see what happens. And so he tried that. And I hadn't heard from him about 6 months. So I gave him a call and he says, hey, I'll send you the newspaper clipping. So these guys had recovered so dramatically that they had a reporter come and do a story about their quasi-scientific research. Because this fellow, Joe Poloka, decided he just woke up. He could pay attention to the group meetings. He wasn't confused by what people were saying. And he did great, only because they put little fish oil pills in his food.
And that was the only other intervention.
That was the only difference. Other thing that he was the worst guy that they had. People in the program, the Salvation Army program, would say, "Hey, who is this new guy? Who is this guy?"
Wow,
that was the difference.
Okay, now another little PSA, a public service announcement for my audience. What Dr. Umhau is saying is add fish oil supplementation if you are trying to move in the direction of a healthier or maybe no relationship with alcohol. So that we can support. And a quick shout out to so Momentous Supplements, one of my show sponsors. We had their CEO on, Jeff Byers, and I asked him, the whole basis of the episode was, what are 3 supplements you would recommend for anybody trying to have healthier mental fitness, we called it, or mental health, but through the lens of even maybe recovery or moving away from substance. And to his credit, he shouted out and recommended fish oil, omega-3s. He recommended that. So shout out to Jeff Byers for that. Can we go into a little bit more? I didn't expect to go into nutrition, but we talked about omega-3s, but can you just kind of give an overview of maybe some other eating habits or lifestyle changes that people can make for nutrition if they're trying to have better mental health and maybe move away from a substance addiction?
Absolutely. So my interest in nutrition is long standing, because it always made sense that what we ate would make a difference, and for alcohol problems it really does. So it turns out though that it's actually partially the nutrients themselves, but partially the microbiome inside of us that requires certain nutrients. And so what we've learned lately is that the microbiome might be driving people to drink. And in fact, if you transplant someone's microbiome through what they call a fecal transplant to animals, you can make the animals heavy drinkers or alcoholic animals by giving them the fecal material from someone who's a alcohol sufferer.
Good Lord. So wait, let me just process this again with my dumb brain. So if you take the microbiome out of someone who's an active alcoholic, I'll use that term, and put it into an animal, that animal's going to be an alcoholic animal? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially, right.
Good Lord. Wow.
And so what that gives the idea of maybe one day there will be an antibiotic to treat alcoholism.
Wow. Wait, so tie that back to the endorphin conversation. Like some people have a predisposition to, maybe require more endorphins. So you're saying the microbiome is part of that same system, or is that like a separate driver to drink? Or
well, we don't know, but we do know that the people that are given certain diets will have a certain microbiome. And because they're in symbiosis with their human hosts, if they don't get what they need, they will signal the human host, hey, I want some more of this food that I'm used to eating. And so there's animal research that shows that if you do that to an animal, they'll change. If someone, I think it's animals that they've given seaweed. So you give enough seaweed and then you stop seaweed and they'll crave seaweed or something like that, because that's the microbiome's requirement. And so the idea is that you want to have a diverse microbiome that doesn't have so many of one kind of element that would then drive someone to eat too much junk food or eat too much fat or eat too much or drink too much alcohol.
Would you recommend then people consuming fermented foods such as kimchi and sauerkraut? Really?
Absolutely. There's no reason why that wouldn't be good. There's no data to show that most of that works. However, we do have placebo-controlled double-blind studies showing that the yogurt will reduce alcohol craving and improve sobriety. One study, but it's a lot of research showing that the lactobacillus GG that's in yogurt or yogurt itself will reduce liver inflammation in people with alcohol. And we know that liver inflammation is related to alcohol consumption. That's one of the research studies that I did. We did crazy things. Crazy. It's not, it sounds crazy, but it's really very safe. When we do lumbar punctures, we measure spinal fluid from folks, and we can see what kind of inflammation is going on in their brain. And if they have inflammation in their brain, it's correlated with how much they want to drink. And that's all, that inflammation in their brain is driven by the leakiness of their gut permeability. It's driven by their liver inflammation. So my understanding, and this is sort of the way that I look at it, and a lot of it's proven, a lot of it's my hypothesis based on my research, and that is that someone drinks and they eat a lousy diet and they don't exercise and they're under a lot of stress, and all those things together cause their gut to be more permeable. And that allows more bacterial debris, classically called endotoxin, that leaks into the liver and causes liver inflammation. And you get hepatitis and eventually cirrhosis. But you also get signaling of these inflammatory signals called cytokines. They get throughout the body and they mess up all kinds of cell processes in the body. They go in the brain. They make this healthy brain think there is something terrible going on. There's an inflammation going on. They think that they're in a catastrophe mode. So the brain adapts, and it becomes more sensitive, more trigger happy. So it becomes more irritable. So people lose their temper. They become more impulsive, and they feel really. Sometimes they'll have brain fog, or they just feel cloudy headed, or they get depressed or anxious. Guess what makes that feel better? A little bit of drink.
A little bit, yeah. Well, of course, that you get in that vicious cycle, right?
Then you get the vicious cycle.
Yeah. Wow. It's amazing. I'm just contemplating this. So it's like, physical activity, exercise, good nutrition can be a preventative measure, so you don't fall into an addiction. But it sounds like it can also mitigate the damage and also help you climb out of addiction.
Exactly.
All of the above, right?
Exactly. Because that's amazing. You've heard people that get better because they really are go to the gym. They work out all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many great content creators and businesses and apps that really speak to the benefit of exercise alongside other, therapy and other, measures you can take, but just to get out of addiction. And this all really kind of like hammers that home for me. Look, for some reason, when it comes to mental health and recovery from alcohol misuse, people don't talk about supplements enough. When I decided to step away from alcohol and rebuild my health, I quickly learned that nutrition and supplementation weren't just optional, they're essential. That's why I choose Momentous supplements. Look, for me, the goal has always been about health span, living better for longer. And when it comes to supplements for high performers, nobody does it like Momentous. Momentous invests heavily in NSF certification, meaning every batch of their products is tested for heavy metals, harmful additives, and label claim accuracy. You got to know what you're putting in your body. And that's why Momentous is trusted by all 32 professional NFL teams and D1 collegiate sports team dietitians across the country. And look, Momentous doesn't offer every supplement under the sun. Other brands can do that just fine. Instead, Momentous nails the basics with bone-crushing consistency to help you build the perfect and intentional routine for you. And when we talk about basics, what are we talking about? What do I take? I take their protein and their creatine. Momentous protein is best in class for muscle repair and growth, while their CreaPure creatine, the purest form of creatine monohydrate, supports both physical strength and cognitive performance. These are foundational supplements that I continue to use to this day in my health journey for physical strength, mental fitness, and emotional resilience. So whether you're taking your first step or your next step in your fitness journey, these supplements are the building blocks of living better longer. Go to livemomentous.com and try it today at 20% off with code STRENGTH. That's livemomentous.com, 20% off with code STRENGTH, and start living on purpose today. So we talked about omega-3s and different omega-3 foods you might eat, such as fish, and I know nuts and some other things. Talking about now like probiotics and even like prebiotics maybe, but what are some other foods that people can actively choose if they want to continue to move in that direction of mental health?
Basically, every kind of nutrient that you can think of is depleted in people that drink heavy. Okay, we have pretty good data on three things: the omega-3s, the probiotics, and also on calcium. People that take enough calcium as in a little antacid tablet, that's going to reduce their craving for alcohol, believe it or not, just calcium. But
Wow.
people will benefit probably from the B vitamins. Sometimes there's a tremendous help. In fact, there's a literature from back in the 1950s and 60s where they were giving high dose of niacin, vitamin B3, and that would reduce people's alcohol consumption. Nowadays, you might have heard people giving infusions of NAD infusions that helps craving. Well, that's the same metabolic pathway that's going to increase the ability of the brain to function correctly by increasing the level of energy in the brain. And all that makes people think clearly so they can overcome the desire to drink that's driving them to have problems.
Wow. You know, it's amazing as I sit here and talk to you. If I'm someone who's suffering with alcohol and I have the courage to bring it up to my, say, like my primary doctor, right? Like
Right.
my family medicine doctor, it's just amazing when I sit here and talk to you. If I'm fortunate enough to sit across from someone like you, who either draws that out proactively or I disclose that to, I can just tell the recommendations that you would give. It just would help me so much more than what I would say someone who just doesn't have the experience. They'd sit across from someone, I'm drinking too much. They'd be like, well, you know, AA and you should see a therapist and good luck. You know, it's just, it's sad to me that like the level of care, the quality of care you get is contingent on the provider that you're sitting across from, you know. If it's okay, can we talk about, just to go back to the medication assisted treatment part? Because I'm grateful for the nutritional advice there, and we're going to summarize the episode down below for that. So talk to me about how naltrexone or any other medication might support someone trying to stop drinking. What's going on? How do you ingest a pill that somehow does all of this crazy magic in your brain to help you either not feel cravings or just, you know, go one more day without drinking? Well, how does that work? Because it's crazy to me.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. We really are very fortunate to have these medications available that can block craving and the desire to drink. Now, Naltrexone is really the best known one we have. There's been around for the longest. We have more data on it. People have very few really bad side effects from it. Sometimes people get depression or a little bit of anxiety, trouble sleeping, headaches, nausea. But basically, it's a wonderful drug for many, many people. About a third of the people that take naltrexone will drink remarkably less.
How
And
fast? How long does it take?
so it would be typical for someone who's drinking 2 bottles of wine every night to notice that if they take the naltrexone about an hour beforehand, then they've got plenty of blood level of the naltrexone so that it will block their desire to drink. They don't get as much endorphin pleasure from the drinking. So that instead of drinking 2 bottles a night, they'll just stop at 1. That'll be enough for them. And the magic is that it feels like magic. They said, wow, I've never been able to stop at 1 before. I have more control. I feel like I'm not imprisoned by how much I need to drink. And if people do this over and over again, an hour before they drink, then they eventually kind of lose the habit of drinking. Their brain sort of forgets that used to be something that caused pleasure, because hasn't been causing any pleasure as long as they were taking the pill before they drink, and they lose interest in drinking, and they basically become unaddicted or de-addicted. This is Dr. Sinclair, who did these works with animals that described this technique, and it's called the Sinclair method. A lot of people in the alcohol world are aware that this can be really helpful. Sometimes people can't remember to take it. Sometimes they have so much psychological traumas from their past. Some trauma can be really a horrific thing to try to live with, and they really feel like they need those endorphins, and so it's harder for those folks to keep it up and keep taking the naltrexone, which is why people need therapy, or they need nutrition, or they need exercise more than just the pill, because although the pill will stop that craving process, it doesn't fix the brain. People need to eat well enough to let the brain to grow back and recover.
Yeah.
Now, there are other medicines too I'll tell you about if you're interested.
Yeah, well, on the naltrexone front, I should have led with this. I've tried it. I'm actually fortunate. The one of my sponsors of the show, Or Health. I mean, naltrexone, that's their thing, and I use the word magic because that's how I described it to my wife. So for me, my triggering time is always with 3 little kids, dinner on the table, moving from work to like, dad had, and just like the chaos and the noise and all of that. My triggering times are around like 5 o'clock, 5:30. And I remember the first time, it might've been the second day that I took naltrexone. I was kind of like easing into it. I know that OR recommends like you take a smaller dose and then you kind of get up to the full dose. But that to say, I sat down at dinner when I would normally just be like thinking like I need a drink just to help kind of like, turn down the volume in my head. My wife had a drink. I sat there and I literally felt nothing. Like I could have cared a less about that drink sitting there. And I couldn't believe it. And I said to my wife, she's like, "What are you feeling?" And I was like, "Magic. Like this is crazy to me. I don't understand how this works." Can we get into the how just a little bit? So like, what is actually happening in my brain? What is that medication doing? Where does it go? And how does it stop the intended effect of alcohol, which is that euphoric feeling or whatever it is for everybody?
So when you drink, you get some of the endorphin production, and that triggers the brain to say, "I want more of this." Just like when we're with our family, sitting around our family, we want to be with them more. It's how the brain works, by being triggered. So typically, if you see somebody drinking, or if it's going to be the time to drink, or it's the right situation, your brain says, "Oh, I'm going to have some of that endorphin producing alcohol in just a minute. I'm going to feel that pleasure." And that endorphin trigger in your brain is just like that first drink, and you want to drink more. However, if you take a medicine like specifically naltrexone, it sits on the place of that nerve cell that gets that endorphin and blocks it. So it blocks the effect of the natural endorphins that would normally cause that nerve cell to fire and to say, "Hey, I want some more of that stimulation." So it blocks that pleasure. So you're sitting there thinking about alcohol, but you don't get the same pleasure from the endorphins, and you're not driven to drink. You think about it a little bit, and then you think about something else. It doesn't create that obsessive thoughts about craving.
So that same receptor that's being blocked, I'm picturing like a catcher. I don't know why I'm picturing like a catcher's mitt waiting for a ball, but yeah. But so that same receptor how does it distinguish the right endorphins to block versus the wrong endorphins? Like if I'm not having a drink, but also hugging my daughter at the same time, how is it not also going to kind of mute the joy or the experience of the hug, but not have the impact of the alcohol? Does that make sense?
Our brains are incredibly complicated, and the
Yes,
endorphins are
mine is.
not the only thing that causes us to have pleasure. People say, "Oh, well, if I have the naltrexone, then I won't experience pleasure." But that's not the case. Over months of time, you might feel a little bit less excited about things. And then that's why we use the Sinclair method, because in the Sinclair method, you don't have to take the naltrexone every day for the rest of your life. You just take the naltrexone before you drink. Here's the other thing, Jesse. So one of the things that they have to be aware of is if you take it regularly and then quit, say, "Oh, I'm not going to take it tonight because it's Saturday night, I want to drink." Your endorphin receptors will have sensitized themselves, so they're looking for that stimulation. So when you drink on Saturday night after having those receptors blocked for 5 days, you may experience way much more pleasure drinking than you ever did before. And that can make you drink way more. So that's sort of a downside of naltrexone if you're going to just kind of game the system. Naltrexone works great, but you have to use it every single time. Otherwise, it may not work for you.
Yeah. And I'm just realizing too, because, I've immersed myself in this world and I've learned about it. I'm certainly learning a lot more today with you. But for anyone listening that's probably hearing like, what? Medication and also drinking? That might be a little confusing. So can you touch on, like, as far as using something naltrexone, can you just elaborate on you can use it to be abstinent, but you can also use it if your goal is moderation. Is that fair of me to say that? Is that accurate?
When naltrexone first came out on the market, the label for naltrexone that the doctors would read and the patients would read says to take it only if you've stopped drinking to preserve your abstinence. And so that's how we would use it. And they said, just take it. Doesn't matter when you take it any time. And it didn't work that great, because what would happen if you took it at night before you went to bed? Well, the next afternoon, your blood level would be almost zero. And so really wouldn't do anything when you had a drink. It might stop craving though. However, it did help some people. It does help some people who just want to be abstinent and stop the craving. But eventually they quit using the naltrexone because they might feel bland or they get tired of taking a pill. And eventually the cravings come back and they start drinking. if you use the naltrexone and drink, it blocks that reflex. You unlearn or you uncondition that, and you extinguish your desire to drink using the Sinclair method. So you could basically be through with it and never have to take it again. Although some people say that they can continue drinking as long as they take the pill, which is true. My recommendation is always, once you get free of the desire to drink, just stop. It's simpler.
Just
You don't have to
stop.
worry about
Why?
taking some
Yeah.
medicine, right? We
Why go
all want
back?
people
Yeah.
to take less medicine, not more. So
I love it. I love it. That's great advice. And trust me, anyone listening should take your recommendation if they're considering something like naltrexone. So I appreciate that. And I'm realizing a question that I didn't ask. And now what I'm going to do, if it's okay, I'm going to kind of pull up and maybe backwards relevant to this conversation and just talk a little bit about AUD and alcoholism. So I've noticed that you've used the word alcoholic and alcoholism. I used it once. I typically use alcohol use disorder. In your opinion, does it matter which we use? And maybe from a medical standpoint?
I want to be sensitive to folks. Okay, so I don't want to use the derogatory. Some people think it's derogatory to use the term alcoholic, and I didn't try not to use that. Please excuse me if I have. But some people feel like it's appropriate. Some people think alcoholism is a reasonable thing to say. It doesn't label the person. It sort of describes the situation. Alcohol use disorder is probably more accurate because there's such a continuum on how alcohol can be causing problems. Everybody seems to be a little bit different. It's really a hard thing to know what to say about someone who drinks too much, or someone has trouble with alcohol. But here's the interesting thing, Jesse. It's not actually the drinking that's the disorder or the disease. It's the thinking about the drinking that's the disease. Right? You
That's
don't
a
want
good
to think about
clarification.
disease. So you want to be free of those thoughts about alcohol. So my goal for my patients is to be free. Life happens. And if you don't have the friends, if you don't have the fellowship, if you don't have the meaning in life, the belief in a higher power, all those things are critical so that when life happens and it's really rough, then you'll still have the willpower. You still desire to do what you want to do with your life and to go forward and not destroy it with alcohol.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how much of what you just shared in your opinion there, how much of that is like learned experience by working with people through recovery to see what matters and to see what helps, and also your own kind of personal belief? Like, how did you land on that? Finding meaning and purpose in life as a seriously important aspect of like recovery and just living a happy, fulfilled life.
Well, I believe that, but there's also lots of data to show that that's true. So people that do the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, if people go to meetings, they get involved, they do better. People with meaning in life live longer. People that are tied in with others in social groups, they live longer. And the meaning in life is also very important for people's well-being and health.
Yeah, and I appreciate, by the way, your sensitivity in respect to like the term alcoholic and alcohol use disorder. I felt it come off of you. You want to be sensitive, and I'll say, I think you'll be episode like 60 for this show. I've had so many powerful people who have amazing redemptive stories of recovery that swear by Alcoholics Anonymous, the organization,
Right.
as like the thing that saved their life. So you can't question that. You can't, like, in my opinion, someone who's overly critical of that label or that system is just not paying attention and not trusting people's own discernment to say, this is how I got better. While at the same time, I understand that alcohol use disorder and the spectrum, I can't ignore that there's science behind that, right? And I think that, I don't know that there needs to be a right or wrong answer, but I heard it described once, and you tell me what you think of this, but someone came on the show, she was a clinician, licensed addiction counselor. She said that she called the alcoholic model a moral model and the AUD model the medical model. The difference being a lot of science and evidence and research on one side, and more, I don't know how to describe it, but kind of just intuition and tradition on the other side, if that makes sense.
Well, it's extremely complicated. Humans are really complicated, and it's wonderful that we are made that way. But I think it's hard to put people in boxes. And one of the things I always want to encourage people is that people change in different ways. Some people change through Alcoholics Anonymous, which I've seen. Some people change through the medicines, which I've seen. Some people change through fitness. I've seen that, and also through I've seen people change just through having a lot of omega-3. So a lot of things.
Whatever gets you free. Whatever gets you free is what your goal is.
Right.
I love it. And the show, when we launched, we were called Live Fit, Break Free. That was the original name of this show. So I'm all in the freedom realm. One of the things when we booked this conversation and I was researching you, one of the things I was really excited to chat with you about is just kind of what you've seen in terms of trends with drinking over the years and decades that you've been in practice and research. So I'll ask it this way. Maybe we'll just focus on America, but as a society, as a culture, and as it relates to drinking, are we getting better or are we getting worse? Are we drinking more or less?
I think it's worse only because the diet is so much worse now. That's the problem, I think. I think that Alcoholics Anonymous used to work a lot better 50, 60 years ago because people didn't have as much brain inflammation and their diets were better and they didn't have as much to overcome with that. And so their brains would grow. If they stopped drinking for a while, their brains would grow back and they could pay attention to their groups and they'd recover. Now, I don't think they have that chance. But I think that there's always been a lot of people that drink, maybe more in different countries. Stress makes people drink more.
Yeah. Wow. So coming back to nutrition, you really believe or you've really seen that nutrition is absolutely pivotal when it comes to alcohol.
It's a very important part of that, and it's the brain atrophy. It's a brain disease. Alcoholism in the long term will cause people's brain to get smaller and smaller. And what's interesting, it's actually white matter, the connecting fibers of the brain that come back first when you stop drinking. And so those connection fibers allow you to have more insight and more awareness. And so you're not in denial and you can think clearly and have more, whatever willpower you have is more powerful, so to speak.
Yeah. If I'm following you, and I think I am, that kind of speaks to like, if you can get to 7, 14, 21 days and just remove alcohol, you're more likely to be successful because you're able to like have more clarity and willpower,
Right.
and it kind of reinforces itself in the positive direction, right?
Right. Particularly if you eat well. Like I always tell I have patients that don't have a whole lot of money. And I just said, go buy a can of salmon, eat that every day. That's fabulous food for people. And they get the omega-3s and the calcium and all that. And it's really healthy. I'm doing a study in Africa with a friend of mine is actually doing the work, but we're working together to find a program for some people in this slum in Nairobi who don't have enough money for naltrexone. Naltrexone pill costs as much as people would make in a week. It's not feasible. But what they do have is they have a very strong Christian church that's helping youth not drink. It has a nutritional component where they'll get this fish soup. They put sardines in a soup, and they'll have that along with some vegetables and fermented milk. All that's really good for the nutritional part. But for the medication, so this is where I wanted to mention to your listeners that there are other medications that work maybe a lot better for the individual than naltrexone. And so for these folks, we use something called ondansetron. Ondansetron is commonly used in America for nausea. Good proportion of your patients would have had it if they ever go to the emergency room for upset stomach and they get something for nausea. But ondansetron is usually given at 4 milligrams or even 8 milligrams to stop people from being nauseous. But if you give 0.2 milligrams or 0.4 milligrams, it can reduce their craving for alcohol. And so the issue is, how do you get that tiny of a dose from a pill? So you have to use the pediatric liquid, which happens to be an over-the-counter medication in Nairobi. So for the cost of a $5 bottle of this pediatric liquid, they take 5 drops in the morning, 5 drops in the evening, and a bottle lasts 3 months. And because those folks tend to have the specific genetics that it works on, their alcohol consumption drastically has reduced.
Wow. Now, is that, as far as in the brain, is it doing the same thing that naltrexone does, in that it's acting as an antagonist?
It works somewhere else in the brain. Ondansetron works on the serotonin system. So different pathways. So some of my patients will get ondansetron and it rapidly reduce how much they drink.
Ondansetron, by the way, as an aside, I'd love to meet the scientist that named it because I think he or she has a sense of humor. That's a funny name, Ondansetron. Sounds like a Transformers rival that like Optimus Prime would fight or something. So don't mind my humor. Okay, so any other medications that you've found to be safe and effective?
So on the market, we have a medicine called a camprosate, and that works great for people who want to stop drinking. They take it 3 times a day. a great medicine. It's indicated by the FDA for this purpose, so many doctors understand how that works. And it really does work great, helps people stop drinking. I remember I treated one of your brother Marines who was just having a hard time not drinking. You know, his family, his wife had just left, and he just really wanted to stop. So he found me. He would go a few days without drinking and drink, and a few days. But anyway, he started taking the camprosate, and over about 3 or 4 months, he just went so that he didn't need to drink anymore. And about a year later, he said, Doc, I wish someone in my counseling or in one of the divorce attorneys or somebody had told me that medications that would reduce my craving for alcohol even exist. Because if I knew they existed, I would be married now and I wouldn't be sharing custody.
Oh man, breaks my heart. God bless you. God bless him. That breaks my heart that awareness isn't there.
So that's one medication. There are other medications that are used off-label. One medication that I use a lot is toprimate. It's used for headaches and seizures and weight loss, but toprimate works great for some people. Another medicine is called baclofen, used extensively in Europe and Australia. There was a doctor who did not respond to naltrexone or any of these other medication named Dr. Oliver Amundsen. And he was an eminent cardiologist, and he had to stop his practice because he couldn't stop drinking. He couldn't find anything to help him. It didn't work for him. But he tried on this medicine called baclofen, which is a muscle relaxant that people use for spasticity. And he found that it would reduce his craving for alcohol. He wrote a book about it and published it in French. And 300,000 French guys and gals have tried it for their to reduce their drinking. So it's on the market in France for that purpose. But here in America, it's off-label. But it's one of the ones that's helpful.
That's what I was just thinking about, because you keep citing these medications and then where they're being taken prominently. Why do you think in America we're kind of slow to adopt this?
There's no patent on this, so that you can't patent it for that purpose because it's readily available. Same with toprimate. So there's a real issue with not being able to market drugs that don't have a patent. So there's no commercial interest in doing that. Another one that works great is a medicine called prazosin, which is a blood pressure medicine. And some people use gabapentin. I don't like gabapentin because it's somewhat addicting, so I don't use that so much. But there are other medicines too that may work. People talk about some of the newer medicines that might help, but they're more dangerous. And I'm really leery about medicines that might hurt my patients. So I'm very slow to adopt things that I'm not certain are safe. So that's
thank you
my
for that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about nutrition. We talked about even like deeper things like finding purpose and meaning. Now we're talking about medication. That to ask, if you were to kind of recommend a blueprint, I'll use that word, like kind of a blueprint for recovery, understanding that not everybody's the same and you have to meet them where they are. But if you could try your best to just kind of maybe recommend an overall blueprint for that could pretty much fit to most people looking to have either no relationship with alcohol or a healthier one, what would that look like? Therapy, nutrition, just kind of lay it all out. What can people do? What should people do if they want to make that change today?
So I have a patient and she came to me and I recommended everything that I know might help because I don't know what any particular person's going to benefit from. She likes singing, so she's going to join a choir. She's going to join a church and go to a choir. She was very keen to improve her diet. She eats pretty well, but she's going to take a lot more fish oil. She's going to work out more. She's going to get a dog. So people get endorphins from dogs, by the way. There are other places to get endorphins besides cleaning bathrooms in a cancer ward. So people
Good to hear.
I encourage her to do things like play pickleball back and forth with someone else can cause a lot of endorphins. I recommend she get involved in these online groups. Certainly, or your sponsor has very good programs where people get involved, and that's really helpful to talk to other people. We have opportunities to do that online now, but an in-person meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous is fabulous. Read about the 12 steps. Go to meetings, sit in the back and just hear what people's stories are. Find a meeting where they have people there that you like. Work the 12 steps and make yourself the best person you can, because then you don't have any of these things sit in the back of your mind making you want to feel bad, and then you don't have to drink because you have some guilty thing you're feeling about. If you work through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, you can really get free of a lot of that. So that's what I recommend. Sometimes there's church programs. This Celebrate Recovery is a wonderful program for people who are of the Christian faith. And there's programs for other religions as well that will really help people feel accepted and encourage them in their struggle as they're trying to do the right thing. I have an utmost respect for folks like yourself that are trying to do the right thing, because it's really hard when you're thinking about alcohol all the time to do the right thing. And my hat goes off to you and any of your listeners who are working to make themselves the best people that they can. So.
Well, thank you, sir. And well said. You just made me think of someone who I know, someone very, very close to me who I love dearly. For years, I knew was suffering with alcohol and was refused to get help and felt very uncomfortable showing up to a meeting with people you don't know, right? I mean, doing something for the first time is hard. Change is hard. I'm talking about going to an AA meeting. And then very, very recently, I'm talking like in the last 60 days, heard from this person. They decided to go to a virtual meeting. They found an app. It was a free app. It helped them understand where are the in-person meetings for AA, where are the virtual ones. This person showed up to a virtual meeting. And to your point, he kind of there was no expectation of him to contribute. He just sat and listened and learned and watched. And he did that several times. And then finally, based on what he was hearing, he realized two things. I said it is a he. He said, wow, I'm just like these people. And I'm hearing things that I've been like knowing about myself for years. And it was so refreshing to hear that. And then he realized, like, you know what? I should be contributing. And then over time, he's contributing. Actually, as a matter of fact, I've got it on my calendar. I'm pretty sure this person's going to be at their first time ever 60 days without a drink.
Oh, it's wonderful. That's just
in
wonderful.
their life. And I mean, I could cry about it, and I have, and he listens. So I love you. I love you, buddy. One more question for you, sir. I know, you're doing a lot of work, research, you have a website, but if people want to learn more about your work or just kind of follow you or keep an eye on what you're working on, where would you direct them to? How can they find you and learn from your amazing expert wisdom?
Well, thanks, Kizzy. I have a couple of websites. One is alcoholrecoverymedicine.com. And that's my private practice. And I also have one that I'm working on to increase the knowledge about alcohol called 10 Good Rules, TENGOODRULES.com. Because there's so many things that are simple that people can do to protect themselves from getting into trouble in the first place. And that's what I kind of talk about in my on that site.
And if you could send me those links, I will include them in the episode resources when we publish this. Dr. Umhau, if anyone wanted to actually work with you, I know you mentioned you do telemedicine. Is that something that my audience could do if they're interested?
Absolutely. I have licenses in about 7 of the big states, and I'd be glad to have new patients. I really enjoy what I do and look forward to maybe helping some of your folks.
And I'm sure you could. Thank you so much for being here. I've learned a lot. I have a lot to think about and study. It's been amazing having you. But thanks for joining the Sober Strength Show, Dr. Umhau.
Jesse, thank you for what you do. I know you're helping a lot of people, and my hat goes off to you. Best of luck to you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Dr. John Umhau, everybody. Live deep. All right, everybody. That's the show, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Sober Strength podcast and spending some time with us today. We've got a favor to ask. If you enjoyed the show, would you please consider subscribing to the show and even leaving a rating and review? That simple act drastically helps us reach more people in our mission to help them live better, longer, healthier lives. You can also follow us if you'd like on Instagram and YouTube for regular tips and motivation around mental health, addiction, and so much more. Know that your support fuels our brand and is greatly appreciated. So until next time, stay strong and live deep.